Good morning, everyone. We are up to Perek Dalet Mishna Hey, and this is a continued discussion of the fact that when the produce is yet unprocessed, that the halacha is that you can snap what you can't eat. So yesterday, the Mishnah discussed what's called snacking by drinking wine out of a wine press and what's called formal eating. So now the Mishnah is going to discuss some more examples. Hamakalev sa'irim, one who is peeling barley shells, which means like this. There are these whole soft shells on the individual kernels, and he is peeling them off. He's removing them. Mekalef achas v'eichal, a time and eat. That means you take a barley, you peel it, and you eat it. Sounds kind of tedious to me, but that's what he has to do in order for it to be considered snacking. You peel each one and you eat it. You peel, you eat. You peel, you eat. However, if you peeled and you gathered in your hand, that means you peeled at least two, and instead of eating them right away, you basically put it into your hand, chayev. Then you're going to be obligated to separate shemis and maasros before you can eat them, because that's the way you formally eat barleys. You basically take a couple in your hand and you eat it out of your hand. So if you do one at a time, if you peel one at a time, so that's called snacking. But if you peel and you gather at least two in your hand, that's called formal eating. Now, the Bartanur brings down that we have to qualify this, that this is only true when you are standing at a distance from the threshing floor. Let me read how they bring it down here. However, this is only if he shells and eats them at a distance from the threshing floor, where they are now piled up waiting to be threshed. Because don't forget, he is peeling these barleys. That means they're not threshed yet. But if he eats them next to the threshing floor, he is considered to be snacking, even if he shells many at once, since he puts whatever he is left over back on the pile. This is something we had yesterday, that if you're going to put it back, at least if you're going to put it back, at least according to the Chachamim, if you're going to, that was by wine, but there is a concept that if you're going to put it back, that it's considered snacking. So in this case of the barleys, where we don't find any kind of argument between the Meir and the Chachamim, as we had in the previous Mishnah, according to everyone, if you're next to the, if we're talking about, there are these barleys that are piled and ready to be threshed, and you took a couple and you're peeling them, that just the fact that you're taking them off the pile is not going to take it away from being a snack. It's all going to depend on whether you gather it in your hand or not. But again, if it's near the threshing floor, then peeling a couple in your hand first and then eating is still snacking, because since you could always put it back. While if you're standing at a distance where already it's not as recognizable, or you're not going to go ahead and put it back because you're far away from there, therefore, then it's going to depend on if you've peeled them and you've basically held two of them in your hand before eating. That will then, if you do one at a time, you will not separate shemis and maasros. If you already put two in your hand, you will have to. Mishnah continues. Now we're talking about where a person, wheat grows with hulls covering the kernels. These come off during threshing and are known as chaff. Wheat kernels were sometimes eaten raw. A person wishing to do so would rub the kernels between his hands to break off the hulls, and then separate the kernels from the chaff. So melo melilais shalchita means that he is rubbing the wheat, he's rubbing the kernels to get the chaff off. So now he's got in his hand the kernels and the chaff. Menapa miyad liyad v'oichel. You could sift out the chaff by moving it from one hand to the other hand. So that means you've got, your hand has these wheat kernels with the chaff. So what do? You put it into your next hand. By doing that, the kernels land up in your hand and the chaff falls off and flies away. So that's how you're sifting it. So if that is what you do, you separated them in one hand, then you sifted it by for the chaff out by putting it into your next hand, and now you want to eat, go ahead. That's snacking. However, let's say you sifted it. You moved it from one hand to the other hand, you sifted it. And then you put the kernels onto your lap, then already chayiv. Then already you're going to be obligated to Shemus and Maisris, because that's no more snacking. That's already formal eating. Eating it from your hand is snacking when it comes to the barleys. Eating it off your lap is considered formal eating. Now, another thing that will make it to formal eating is if, let's say, somehow or another, after you separated the kernels from the chaff in one hand, instead of just putting it into the next hand to sort it out, you use some kind of sorting utensil to sort it out. Use some kind of utensil you sort it out. That would also make it be considered already a regular eating. Once you're using a utensil to separate the chaff from the kernels, that's already a sign of regular eating. You wouldn't be able even to snack until you separate Shemus and Maisros. Okay, so now the Mishnah is going to continue, and actually, we're not talking about anymore the question of snacking. We're actually talking about different types of plants to know what parts of the plants does what Shemus and Maisros from. Plants can have different parts to them that are all edible, but the question is still going to be: do you have to separate Shemus and Maisros from every part of the plant? So the Mishnah reads like this: Kusbar. Kusbar is coriander. Shazara lazera, you planted it for its seeds. Yeraka pater, its vegetation, its leaves are exempt. Now, this coriander plant had leaves and it had seeds. The main part of the plant were the seeds. The seeds were crushed and used as spice. So when you go ahead and you plant this for the purposes of the seeds, even if you decide to go ahead and eat the leaves, then you have to separate Shemus and Maisros from it. The main part are the seeds. The leaves are not considered a significant part of this plant. And therefore, if it was not planted for those leaves, even if you decide to eat the leaves, you're not going to separate Shemus and Maisros at all. Doesn't make a difference. Eat it formally. You don't have to separate Shemus and Maisros then. However, Zerah liyarak, let's say you planted it for its leaves. You've got this thing. You want coriander leaves. Misaseres zera v'yarak. Then you have to separate Shemus and Maisros both from the seeds and from the leaves. If I planted for the leaves, that means I gave it enough significance to say it's obligated Shemus and Maisros. But if there are seeds there too, I can't ignore the seeds because I didn't plant it for the seeds. The seeds are still the main part of the plant. And therefore, you'd have to separate Shemus and Maisros from both in that case. Next, Rebbe Lezer Omer. Rebbe Lezer says like this. Hasheves. Sheves is dill. So by dill, you've got three parts to it. You've got its seeds, it's got its leaves, and you have its stems. Rebbe Lezer Omer. Hasheves mis aseres zera v'yarek v'zirin. Rebbe Lezer says when it comes to dill, all three parts of it have to be tithed. All three parts you have to separate Shemus and Maisros from the seeds, the leaves, and the stems. And that's because the stems and the leaves, according to Rebbe Lezer, are eaten by some people. Some people do eat them. It would seem more than the coriander leaves. And therefore, according to Rebbe Lezer, these are all considered significant parts that all parts of them need to have separate Shemus and Maisros separated from them. The Chachamim say, nothing has to be tithed from its plants, from its seed and its leaves. Let's talk about shechalayim and gargir. Now, what that means is like this. The case here by the dill is that you just planted it. You didn't plant it with any specific intention. You just planted it. So Rebbe Lezer says there are some people who eat all three parts of it, and therefore all three parts are significant enough to have to separate Shemus and Maisros from. The Chachamim say that when you plant something stam, that means you plant it without any specific intention, then there are only two plants that we say they are seed and leaves. You would have to separate Shemus and Meiser from both in the case where you just planted it without any specific intention. And those two plants are what's called gargir, or called shachalayim. Gargir translates shachalayim as cress, and gargir as garden rocket. Those two plants, not only are there seeds commonly eaten, but most people will eat the leaves too. And therefore, if you plant the shachalayim or the gargir without any specific intention, then that's a case where both the leaves and the seeds and the leaves, you have to take Shemus and Meiser from before you eat from them, even to snack. If you're talking about dill or anything else, then everything else, if you plant it without any intention, the main thing is the seeds, and it's going to be the seeds that are going to be separated. They're going to need Shemus and Meiser from them. The other things won't. However, as we had in the case before by the coriander, if you intend to plant it for the leaves, then even there, where it's uncommon to eat, if that's what you planted it for, that's what Shemus and Meiser from. The Chachamim don't argue with that. The Chachamim don't argue when it comes to that. If you planted the dill and you planted it for the leaves and or for the stems, then you'll have to separate Shemus and Meiser from them. They are edible, and if this is your intention, then that gives them enough significance to have to separate Shemus and Meiser from them. The argument between Rabbi Elazar and the Chachamim was talking about pretty much about dill, where dill is more common than the coriander. So Rabbi Elazar held that the leaves and the stems of the dill are eaten enough, considered by some people, that's enough to give them significance to, even when you plant the plant without any specific intention, to have to separate Shemus and Meiser from the leaves and the stems also. The Chachamim say no. In the case of the dill, it's not, those other parts besides the seeds are not eaten by people enough for them to have their own significance in a case where you planted them without a kind of intention. The only plants that, without planting specific with intention, where you have to separate the leaves and from the seeds and the leaves, are the shachalayim and the gargir. But if you intend to plant it for the leaves or for the stems, in the case of dill, or in any other case of something unlike the shachalayim and gargir, if you specifically plant it for the leaves and the stems, not just for the seeds, and possibly even if it's just for them, yet for some reason you don't want the seeds. Nonetheless, in those situations, wherever there is intention to grow them for the leaves or the stems, then you definitely have to separate Shemus and Meiser from them. And the seed too, because that's the main part. But if you plant it without any intention, say the Chachamim, the only plants that when you're just planting them without any specific intention, that in that case you have to separate from the seeds and the leaves, the next positive commandment that potentially one can transgress when speaking Lashon Harah, the al kulam oiver oid al mitzvahs aseidas Hashem Elokecha tira. Above all else, or one of the main things that a person is going to transgress when he speaks Lashon Harah, which is in some ways a serious enough transgression over all the others, is oiver oid al mitzvahs aseidas Hashem Elokecha tira. A person transgresses the positive commandment of you shall fear your God. What does this mean? The Torah is exhorting us that we be in fear of Hashem all the days of our lives. What does being in fear mean? When something comes our way and it is attempting us to do something wrong, we have to basically awaken our spirits in that situation and think over the fact that Hashem watches over all our actions, and we are going to be responsible and receive punishment for what we did wrong. and that will hopefully hold him back from sinning. That means a person is faced with a temptation to sin. So the Torah says, fear God. That means stop and think about the fact that Hashem will hold you responsible for what you're about to do. And that will hopefully hold you back. But that's what you're obligated to do. And someone who speaks Lashon Harah and doesn't care about this, doesn't take in mind the idea of doesn't when he's ready to speak Lashon Harah all the time, which means that he is not awaken and think about himself, think about fear of Hashem, think about the responsibilities he'll have to Hashem for what he's doing wrong. Bittul Aseizu, he has clearly disobeyed this positive commandment. And therefore, when a person is about to speak Lashon Hara, there is a positive commandment to remind yourself about the fact that Hashem will hold you responsible for it. But if a person just speaks Lashon Hara and doesn't even think about that at all, so that was a situation where he should have thought about fearing God and he didn't do so, he has disobeyed this positive commandment. Have a wonderful day.